England, February 14, 1944. 0400 hours. The air at RAF Bassingbourn is so cold it burns your lungs. 23-year-old Staff Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" Mitchell stands in the darkness beneath the belly of a B-17 Flying Fortress. His breath forms white clouds in the beam of his flashlight. His hands, despite 2 pairs of gloves, are already numb. The bomber looming above him has a name painted on her nose: Lucky Strike. But there's nothing lucky about what Tommy sees right now. Hydraulic fluid. Dripping. Steady. Rhythmic. Each drop catching the light as it falls onto the frozen mud below. In 7 hours, 18 B-17s from the 91st Bomb Group are scheduled to take off. Target: Frankfurt, deep inside Germany. A round trip of over 600 miles through some of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. 18 bombers, 180 men, all depending on him. Tommy traces the leak with his flashlight. The hydraulic line feeding the main landing gear system. Not just damaged, sheared. A piece of shrapnel from yesterday's mission finally worked its way through. The bomber barely made it back to base. Now the line is hemorrhaging fluid faster than the system can maintain pressure. Without hydraulics, the landing gear won't deploy. Without landing gear, the plane becomes a tomb for 10 men. The replacement part? Somewhere in a supply depot in Scotland, or maybe still on a ship crossing the Atlantic. Either way, it won't be here for 3 days, maybe 4. The mission? Scheduled for 1100 hours, no delays, no excuses. Not with the weather window finally opening after 2 weeks of fog. Tommy looks at his watch. 7 hours. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out something that has no business being in his hands at this moment. A coat hanger. To understand what happens next, you need to understand the machine Tommy's trying to save. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. 4 Wright Cyclone engines, each producing 200 horsepower. Gross weight 65,000 pounds fully loaded. Wingspan 103 feet 9 inches. Length 74 feet 9 inches. But those numbers don't tell you the real story. The real story is that by February 1944, the B-17 has become the tip of the spear for America's daylight bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. The 8th Air Force, based at dozens of airfields across England, is sending hundreds of these bombers into hostile skies every single day that weather permits. And the cost? Staggering. On August 17, 1943, just 6 months before Tommy stands under Lucky Strike. The 8th Air Force launched a double-pronged attack on ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt and aircraft plants in Regensburg. 376 B-17s took off that morning. 60 didn't come back. 600 men lost in a single day. 2 months later, on October 14th, a date now known as Black Thursday, they tried Schweinfurt again. 291 bombers attacked. 60 were shot down. 17 more were so badly damaged they never flew again. Another 121 suffered major damage. The mathematics were brutal. The 8th Air Force was losing bombers faster than factories could replace them. They were losing crews faster than training schools could produce them. By early 1944, the average loss rate per mission was 3%. Doesn't sound like much until you do the math. A B-17 crew's tour of duty was 25 missions. 3% losses per mission meant that statistically, only 1 in 4 crews would complete their tour. 1 in 4. The pilots knew it. The bombardiers knew it. The gunners knew it. Every man who climbed into a B-17 knew that the odds of seeing home again were worse than flipping. 2 coins and getting heads both times, but here's what most people don't know. The biggest threat to these bombers wasn't always the Luftwaffe. Wasn't always the flak batteries. Sometimes, more often than anyone wanted to admit, the threat was the machines themselves. A B-17 Flying Fortress was a marvel of engineering. It was also an impossibly complex piece of equipment being asked to do things no aircraft had ever been designed to do. Flying at 25,000 feet where the temperature drops to 50 below zero, carrying 6,000 pounds of bombs, sustaining damage from 20-millimeter cannon shells and still bringing crews home. The hydraulic system alone was a masterpiece of engineering and a maintenance nightmare. 4 independent fuel supplies, each feeding 1 engine, 3 fuel tanks in each wing, interconnected transfer systems, electric boost pumps, engine-driven fuel pumps, cross-feed valves that could route fuel from any tank to any engine. The hydraulic system operated the cowl flaps on the engines. It powered the brakes. Most critically, it controlled the landing gear. Unlike later aircraft with extensive hydraulic systems throughout, the B-17 actually had relatively few hydraulic components. This was intentional. Every hydraulic line was a potential point of failure. One puncture from flak or fighter fire and the entire system could drain dry in minutes. The engineers at Boeing knew this. They designed redundancy where they could, manual backups where possible. But some systems, like the main landing gear, simply had no manual alternative. No hydraulics meant no landing gear deployment. No landing gear deployment meant a belly landing. A belly landing with a full bomb load meant an explosion that would vaporize the crew before they even knew what happened. This is the reality Tommy Mitchell faces as he stands under lucky strike at 0400 hours on February 14, 1944. The standard procedure is clear. Aircraft with damaged hydraulic systems are grounded until proper replacement parts arrive, and repairs are completed according to technical manual specifications. No exceptions, no improvisation. Too much at stake. But here's the problem with standard procedures. Nobody writing those procedures in Boeing's engineering offices in Seattle had ever stood on a frozen airfield in England watching bomber after bomber return from Germany with holes big enough to crawl through. Nobody writing those procedures had ever seen ground crews working through the night to patch together enough aircraft for tomorrow's mission. Nobody writing those procedures understood that by the book was a luxury they couldn't afford. At the 91st Bomb Group had arrived at Bassingbourn in October 1942. Since then, they'd flown over 300 combat missions. They'd lost 97 aircraft, nearly 1,000 men killed or missing. The ground crews, men like Tommy Mitchell, lived with this every single day. They watched bombers take off in the morning. They counted the ones that came back in the afternoon. They knew every single aircraft by name, by tail number, by personality. They knew which ones had bad oil pressure in number 3 engine, which ones pulled left on takeoff, which ones the crews considered lucky. Lucky Strike had flown 43 missions. 43 times she'd gone into hell and brought her crew back alive. The pilot, Captain Robert Bobby Henderson, had named her after his father's favorite cigarettes. The crew treated her like a living thing. They believed, really believed, that she took care of them. And now she was bleeding hydraulic fluid onto the frozen ground. Tommy looks around the dark airfield. Other ground crews are working on other aircraft, changing engines, patching bullet holes, replacing turrets. The work never stops. He thinks about the options. Ground the plane. Let her miss this mission. Wait for parts. That's the safe choice. The authorized choice. But that means sending 17 bombers instead of 18. That means one less aircraft in the formation. One more gap for German fighters to exploit. One less set of guns protecting the other crews. Tommy makes a decision. He reaches into his toolbox and pulls out a pair of wire cutters. The coat hanger comes from the barracks. Not Tommy's coat hanger. He hasn't owned a civilian coat in 2 years. This one belongs to Technical Sergeant Jake Morrison, the assistant crew chief. Or rather, it belonged to him before Tommy borrowed it without asking at 04:30 hours this morning. The hanger is steel wire, probably manufactured before the war for someone's closet back in Ohio or Pennsylvania. Standard gauge. Nothing special. The kind of thing you'd find in any home in America. Tommy straightens the wire carefully, working it back and forth until the hook separates from the triangular frame. He's left with several segments of straight, flexible steel wire, each piece about 12 inches long. Sergeant Morrison appears behind him. "Tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." Tommy doesn't look up. "Then don't think too hard. Tommy, that's a hydraulic pressure line. You can't just what? Let her sit here while Henderson and his boys climb into another bird. You know every aircraft we put up matters." Morrison is quiet for a moment. He's 26, ancient by ground crew standards. He's been at Bassingbourn since the beginning. He's seen things. The manual says, "I know what the manual says, Jake. I know what everything says. I also know the technical manual was written by engineers who've never been to war." Tommy cuts the damaged section from the hydraulic line. 6 inches of tubing completely sheared through. The cut is clean, too clean. This isn't wear and tear. This is shrapnel damage, probably from the Frankfurt mission 3 days ago. A piece of flak that didn't penetrate the fuselage but clipped this line and finally worked its way through. The hydraulic system on a B-17 operates at 1,000 pounds per square inch. That pressure is what forces the hydraulic fluid through the lines, driving the actuators that lower the landing gear. At that pressure, even a pinhole leak becomes catastrophic. Tommy's plan is simple in concept, terrifying in execution. He's going to bypass the damaged section entirely. He'll use segments of the coat hanger wire to create a flexible bridge around the damaged area, then wrap and seal it so tightly that it can hold pressure. The wire will provide structural support while layers of sealant and pressure tape create an airtight barrier. It's improvisation. It's unauthorized. It's probably a court-martial offense. It's also the only option. Tommy works with surgical precision. He measures the gap twice, then cuts 2 pieces of coat hanger wire to exact lengths. He inserts them into the hydraulic line on either side of the damaged section, using them as internal splints. Morrison watches for a minute, then sighs. You're going to need help. Yeah. And if this blows, we're both facing Article 32 charges. Yeah. And if it fails at altitude, it won't fail. Morrison kneels down next to him. What do you need? For the next 4 hours they work. It's painstaking, delicate work. Every connection has to be perfect. Every seal has to be airtight. One mistake, one weak point, and the entire repair fails. Tommy uses a technique he learned not from any Air Force manual, but from his grandfather, who ran a garage in Detroit. When you can't replace a fuel line on a Model T because parts don't exist anymore, you learn to fabricate solutions. He bends the coat hanger wire into precise shapes, creating a framework around the damaged section. Then he uses aviation-grade sealant, the same compound used to seal fuel tanks, to build up layers around the wire framework. The sealant is thick, viscous, difficult to work with in the cold. Tommy's fingers are so numb he can barely feel them, but he forces himself to work slowly, carefully. Every layer has to cure for at least 20 minutes before the next one can be applied. While they wait between layers, Morrison tells him about yesterday's mission. Henderson's crew ran into a pack of 109s over Belgium on the way back. 8 of them, maybe 10, came in from the sun just like they're trained. Tore into the formation. Tommy applies another layer of sealant. Anybody get hit? 3 birds took damage. Henderson's took the worst of it. Pilot said the plane shook so hard he thought they'd lost the tail, but she held together. She always holds together. That's why we're fixing her. That's why you're risking a court-martial, you mean? Same thing. By Aero 800 hours, the repair is complete. 4 layers of sealant reinforced with pressure tape and wrapped with safety wire. It looks crude. It looks improvised. It looks exactly like what it is, a field repair done with unauthorized materials and unapproved methods. But when Tommy pressurizes the system and checks for leaks, the patch holds, 1,000 pounds per square inch. The hydraulic fluid flows through the lines, bypassing the damaged section entirely, following the new path Tommy's created with coat hanger wire and sealant. No leaks. No pressure drop. The gauge is read normal. Morrison stares at it. I'll be damned. Not yet, anyway. You test the gear? About to. Tommy climbs up into the aircraft's cockpit. The controls are familiar. He's sat in this seat 100 times during maintenance checks. But he's never activated the landing gear system on a repair this improvised. He flips the hydraulic system master switch, checks the pressure gauge. Normal. He places his hand on the landing gear control lever. If the repair fails now, hydraulic fluid will spray throughout the gear bay. The system will depressurize. The aircraft will be grounded anyway, and Tommy will face charges for unauthorized maintenance. If the repair holds, 18 bombers fly today instead of 17. Tommy pulls the lever. The hydraulic system engages. Somewhere beneath the aircraft, massive actuators begin moving. The main landing gear, each assembly weighing over 500 pounds, starts to extend. Tommy watches the indicator lights. They're supposed to change from red to green when the gear is fully down and locked. Red, 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 then green, green, green. Morrison's voice comes from outside. Gear down, locked. Tommy cycles the system again. Gear up, gear down, up, down. Each time the system responds normally. Each time the pressure holds. Each time the improvised repair does exactly what it's supposed to do. At Oro 900 hours, Tommy signs off the maintenance log. Under work performed, he writes, hydraulic line repair. System tested and operational. He doesn't mention the coat hanger. He doesn't mention that the repair violates at least 6 different technical orders. He doesn't mention that if anyone from Boeing or the Air Force Materiel Command saw what he'd done, they'd ground the aircraft immediately. He signs his name and walks away. At 10:30 hours, Captain Henderson and his crew arrive for their pre-flight briefing. They walk out to Lucky Strike at 10:45 hours. Henderson runs his usual external inspection, checking control surfaces, looking for obvious damage. He doesn't look at the hydraulic lines. Why would he? That's ground crew business. At 1100 hours, 18 B-17s from the 91st Bomb Group start their engines. The sound is overwhelming. 72 Wright Cyclone radials coming to life, each one a controlled explosion of fire and metal. Lucky Strike is number 14 in the formation. Tommy stands at the edge of the runway with the other ground crew watching. This is the part of the job nobody talks about. The waiting. The watching. The knowing that if something goes wrong, there's nothing you can do about it now. One by one, the bombers roll down the runway. One by one, they lift into the gray February sky. One by one, they climb and circle, forming up into the combat box formation that gives them the best defensive firepower. Tommy watches Lucky Strike climb. She looks good, steady, strong. Morrison stands next to him. Think it'll hold? It better. And if it doesn't? Tommy doesn't answer. They both know what happens if it doesn't. 10 men trying to land a bomber with no landing gear. A belly landing at best. A fireball at worst. The bombers disappear into the clouds, heading east toward Germany. Tommy walks back to the maintenance hangar. There are other aircraft to work on. Other repairs to make. The work never stops, but he can't focus. All he can think about is that hydraulic line. That coat hanger wire. That improvised repair that's now carrying 10 men into combat at 25,000 feet. The hours pass slowly. At bomber bases across England, ground crews wait. They play cards. They work on other aircraft. They try not to think about the men who are currently fighting for their lives over Germany. At 15:30 hours, 3:30 p.m., the radio crackles to life. Tower. This is Ragged Lead. 18 aircraft returning. Request landing clearance. 18 aircraft. Not 17. Not 16. 18. Everyone made it back. Tommy is outside when the first B-17 appears in the sky. Then another. Then another. They come in spread out, not in formation. Each pilot making his own approach. Each crew chief counting anxiously until he sees his aircraft. Lucky Strike is third to land. Tommy watches her approach. She's trailing a bit of smoke from number 3 engine. That's not unusual. Her bomb bay doors are open. Also not unusual, probably damaged and stuck. But she's flying straight and level. Henderson brings her in smooth and steady. The wheels touch down. The bomber rolls down the runway. Slowing gradually, the landing gear holds Tommy. Doesn't realize he's been holding his breath until the bomber turns off the runway and heads toward the hardstand. When Lucky Strike shuts down her engines, Tommy is there. Henderson climbs out exhausted. His flight suit is soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperatures at altitude. How'd she handle, sir? Henderson pulls off his oxygen mask. Like a dream, Mitchell. Like a damn dream. Hydraulics worked perfect. Gear came down smooth as silk. Tommy nods. Good to hear, sir. You guys do good work. Don't know what we'd do without you. Henderson walks toward the debriefing building. His bombardier, his navigator, his crew, they're all alive. They're all walking. Because a hydraulic system held pressure. Because a coat hanger wire and some sealant did the impossible. Morrison appears next to Tommy. You're one lucky son of a bitch. Not luck. Engineering. That wasn't engineering. That was prayer and desperation wrapped in aviation sealant. Maybe. Tommy looks at Lucky Strike. But it worked. Over the next 3 days, Tommy monitors the hydraulic system obsessively. Every morning he checks for leaks. Every morning the repair holds. On the 4th day, the replacement hydraulic line arrives from the supply depot. Tommy installs it properly by the book according to all technical specifications. He keeps the coat hanger wire segments. He doesn't know why. They're just pieces of bent steel, but they represent something. Lucky Strike flies 16 more missions before the war ends. She brings her crew home every single time. When she's finally decommissioned and scrapped in 1945, she's flown a total of 59 combat missions. Henderson and his crew complete their 25-mission tour and go home alive. They never know about the coat hanger. Tommy never tells them. The story doesn't end with one repair. Word spreads the way it always does in tight-knit communities. Ground crews talk. They share techniques. They learn from each other. Tommy's coat hanger repair becomes part of the unofficial knowledge base that keeps the 8th Air Force flying. It's not just coat hangers, of course. It's 1,000 improvised solutions to 1,000 unexpected problems. When replacement control cables are back-ordered, mechanics fabricate them from salvaged wire. When oil coolers crack, they're repaired with techniques learned from automobile radiators. When electrical systems fail, solutions are borrowed from farm equipment and industrial machinery. The official maintenance manuals grow thicker every month as the Air Force documents approved procedures. But on the flight lines, mechanics develop their own manual, an oral tradition of improvisation and ingenuity passed from crew chief to crew chief. By spring 1944, the tide is turning. The P-51 Mustang escorts are arriving, giving bombers protection all the way to targets deep in Germany. Loss rates start dropping. More aircraft are coming back damaged but repairable. The mechanics' workload actually increases. But now they're repairing aircraft, not replacing them. Tommy gets promoted to technical sergeant in March 1944. He's put in charge of his own ground crew, 6 men responsible for 3 B-17s. He teaches them everything he knows, including the things you can't find in technical manuals. The book, he tells them, is where you start, not where you stop. In April, during routine maintenance, one of Tommy's mechanics discovers the original coat hanger repair still holding pressure in Lucky Strike's hydraulic system. The replacement line installed 3 weeks earlier is the one that's developed a crack. They repair it properly by the book. But Tommy keeps that original coat hanger repair in his mind. It represents something important, a principle that transcends technical specifications. When the mission matters more than the manual, when lives depend on your ability to adapt, you find a way. The European War ends on May 8, 1945. The 8th Air Force flies its last combat mission on April 25, 1945. A strike on the Skoda armament works at Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. By war's end, the 8th Air Force has lost 6,537 aircraft, over 47,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. The B-17 alone accounts for over 4,700 of those lost aircraft. But they completed their mission. The strategic bombing campaign, combined with the Soviet advance from the east and the Allied invasion from the west, brought Nazi Germany to its knees. The ground crews, men like Tommy Mitchell, made it possible. Tommy returns home to Detroit in August 1945. He's 24 years old. He spent 3 years working on bombers, 3 years watching them leave and counting them back, 3 years holding the lives of flight crews in his grease-stained hands. He goes back to work in his grandfather's garage. He fixes cars, changes oil, rebuilds engines. It's simple work. Quiet work. He never talks much about the war. When people ask what he did, he says, maintenance. Kept the planes flying, that's all. Nothing about coat hangers or improvised repairs or hydraulic systems held together with prayer and ingenuity. But he never forgets. In 1987, 42 years after the war, Tommy receives a letter. It's from Robert Henderson, Captain Henderson, the pilot of Lucky Strike, now retired, living in Arizona, 71 years old. The letter is simple. Dear Tommy, I'm writing to everyone from the old crew and ground crew that I can still find. I'm working on my memoirs, nothing fancy, just something for the grandkids. I wanted you to know that I never forgot what you guys did for us. Every mission, we trusted our lives to your skills. Never once did you let us down. Lucky Strike brought us home 59 times. That wasn't luck. That was your work, thank you, Tommy writes back. They exchange a few more letters. Henderson asks about specific missions, specific repairs. Tommy answers what he can remember. He never mentions the coat hanger. Some stories, he figures, are better left untold. Henderson dies in 1993. Tommy attends the funeral. There are other crew members there. The navigator, the ball turret gunner, the radio operator. Old men, now grandfathers, wearing the same ribbons they earned 50 years ago. They share stories. They remember missions. They remember the aircraft that carried them through hell and brought them home. Tommy listens. He doesn't say much, but when they talk about Lucky Strike, when they talk about how she never failed them, how she always brought them back. Tommy allows himself a small smile. He thinks about a hydraulic line, about a coat hanger, about a freezing February morning when the choice was between following the rules and doing what needed to be done. He chose right. That's all that matters. The story of the coat hanger repair isn't unique. Across the European theater of operations from 1942 to 1945, thousands of maintenance personnel performed thousands of improvised repairs on thousands of aircraft. They didn't do it for recognition. They didn't do it for medals. They did it because the mission demanded it. The official U.S. Army Air Force histories barely mention them. The focus is on the pilots, the bombardiers, the men who flew the missions. That's understandable. They faced the immediate danger. The flak, the fighters, the statistical near certainty of death or capture. But behind every successful mission was a ground crew that kept the aircraft flying. Modern. Aircraft maintenance has changed dramatically. Since World War II, today's technicians work with computerized diagnostic systems, precisely engineered replacement parts, and rigid adherence to technical protocols. The improvisation that characterized World War II maintenance would be unthinkable and unsafe with modern aircraft. But the principle remains the same. When the mission matters, you find a way. The B-17 Flying Fortress became legendary not just because of its design, but because of the men who maintained it, the men who flew it, and the men who refused to accept that something couldn't be fixed. Over 12,700 B-17s were built during World War II. Today, fewer than a dozen are still airworthy. They fly at air shows, carrying aging veterans who remember what it was like to climb into one of these machines and fly into combat. The ground crews are remembered less often. Many of their names are lost to history. They didn't keep detailed records of their improvised repairs, their unauthorized modifications, their creative solutions to impossible problems. But their work spoke for itself. Every aircraft that took off, every crew that came home, every mission that succeeded. Tommy Mitchell died in 2003 at the age of 82. He never wrote his memoirs. He never gave interviews about his wartime service. His family found a box of old photographs after he passed. Pictures of B-17s, pictures of ground crews, a few pictures of him standing next to aircraft he'd worked on. Among the photographs was something else. A small piece of bent steel wire carefully wrapped in paper. Written on the paper in faded ink, Lucky Strike, Feb 1944. His grandchildren had no idea what it meant. They threw it away when they cleaned out his house, but that's okay. The real legacy isn't in a piece of wire. It's in the principle it represents. When you're faced with an impossible problem, when the book says it can't be done, when the proper parts aren't available, when time is running out and lives hang in the balance, you don't give up. You find a way. You use what you have. You adapt. You improvise. You solve the problem with skill and determination, and sometimes, yes, with a coat hanger and some sealant. And a whole lot of nerve. That's the legacy of the mechanics who kept the B-17s flying. That's the legacy of the men who won World War II not with headlines or glory, but with grease-stained hands and unshakable resolve. That's the legacy of the coat hanger trick.